Everyone, we are so glad that you are with us today. If you haven't been with us for a few weeks, we just want you to know, everyone to know, whether you're online or in person, that the in-person environment may look a little bit different. Masks are now optional, and we've changed our distancing between groups from 3 seats down to 1. Now, if you are more comfortable, maybe you're thinking about coming next week, then in a masked, required, and socially distanced environment, we have some great spaces down the hallway for you to worship with other people as well, to stream the service. No matter where you are, whether you're at home, whether you're watching later on this week, whether you're in this room, we believe at Forum that we are united because of what Jesus has done for us. And for that, we celebrate. And we at Forum, we love to celebrate what God is doing in the lives of those around us. And this last week, we got to celebrate with our high school seniors' graduation. We want to show some highlights from that event.
Hey Forum, my name is Tyler Hensley, and I'm the high school pastor. Every year at Forum, we set aside a time to honor our high school graduates. Many of these students have grown up in our church, and from the time that they were crawling and taking their first steps, these students have been poured into by not only their parents, but by so many volunteers and ministers. On Thursday, May 13th, we had our graduation celebration for 15 of our graduates and their families to celebrate the growth in their relationship with Jesus over the last 18 years. We got the opportunity to laugh and reflect on the growth of each of these students, and we challenge them as they enter the workforce or head off to college to remember what they've learned and to hold on to the truth of the gospel that's been passed on to them to share with the world. Graduation brings with it many emotions. We're sad when we think about our students moving on from the high school ministry and moving away from Columbia to enter the next chapter of their lives. But we're also incredibly proud of who God has made them to be and how He's going to use them to impact the world with the gospel. Please join us in praying for our 2021 graduates as they carry the gospel with them wherever their next chapter leads them.
Would you all stand and sing with us this morning?
Who am I that the highest King would welcome me? I was lost, but He brought me. Oh, His love for me. Oh, His love for me.
coming when people will no longer listen to sound and wholesome teaching. They will follow their own desires and will look for teachers who will tell them whatever their itching ears want to hear. They will reject the truth and chase after myths. But for us, it is different.
So good to see you guys here with us this morning. I wanted to talk just for a second before we jump into the message about why there's this big piece of glass on stage. And it has everything to do with what we're going to do today as we walk through the concluding verses in 2 Timothy chapter 2. So I'd invite you to get your Bibles out today. This is absolutely one of those texts that we're going to want to engage with. What we are going to see today, I can't overemphasize this enough, is so beautiful in its structure and its design. We are literally going to go verse by verse through this text, and we are going to see its design pattern. That's why we have this up. I want to show you the design pattern of this text because it is, I know I say this a lot, like it's breathtaking. I feel in a lot of ways we are going to see the fingerprints of God Himself revealed through this text. And it is it is going to be marvelous to see what He does. And so if you're just joining us, so you're new with us, my name is Bradley. I'm one of the pastors here. I'm so glad that you've joined us today. And we're in a teaching series called Different. And we're letting a single question guide us through this series. And how do followers of Jesus look different than everybody else? What's the difference between a follower of Jesus and everybody else? Is there a difference? Yes, there is a difference. And so in this 7-part series, we're really looking at 7 of the core differences that should be evident in our lives. And, the series is a little challenging, I think encouraging. It's been a great source of inspiration for me to walk through this narrative each and every week because there are just places in my life where I don't see differences. And I have a desire, like a longing and a hunger to be different. And this text, this series is really helping us to see what are those differences, like just really practically. And so we're going to pick up right where we left off last week, and we're going to start in verse 10 of chapter 2. I want you to encourage you to get a Bible out, whether a device or an actual Bible. We talked about, we set everything up really quickly. First message in this series, we talked about how followers of Jesus have a different calling. That calling that we have is a calling to a different way of life. It is a higher standard of living. There are certain things we say goodbye to. There are certain things we sacrifice for the sake of this calling to be a follower of Jesus. And that set up the next week where we talked about how followers of Jesus have different beliefs. And that should go without saying, I think, sort of on a surface level, but as we pushed into that, we have different beliefs about our beliefs. And the things that we do believe set us apart from every other human being on the planet, which set us up for the third week, which is followers of Jesus. We have different expectations. And this one, it really gets us into the heart of this series. Last week and this week are really sort of the central core elements of this teaching series. Because to be a follower of Jesus it's a commitment. It's not a country club lifestyle. It's not something we slip into and slip out of whenever it's convenient or whatever the circumstances totally line up for us or when we get around to it or whenever we know enough. This is a commitment. And it takes discipline to be a disciple of Jesus. And we walked through this last week, how it takes hard work. As the Apostle Paul would say to Timothy, he's like, join me in suffering. And we've looked into the historical context a little bit about this letter that we're reading called 2 Timothy. And the Apostle Paul, late in his life, probably the last year of his life, is writing to his protege, his disciple, Timothy, who's working in a church in a city known as Ephesus. It's kind of like a combination of New York and Las Vegas. And there's all kinds of stuff breaking out at Ephesus. It's really challenging. And he's just writing this really personal letter. We've intercepted his personal mail, and we get to read it. And he's telling Timothy, he says this in verse 10, the reason why I'm willing to suffer. He's in prison. And the reason why he's telling Timothy, you need to be ready to suffer, brother, is because I just want everybody to come to know Jesus. I don't care what it takes. I'll do anything. I'll lay down my life so that other people can grow to know Jesus. Right? That's really intense. And we're going to build on that today. And we're going to start in verse 11. And he says, this is a trustworthy saying. This is actually one of 5 trustworthy sayings that he references in his pastoral epistles. Now, in most of our Bibles, you'll see that it's indented and it's shortened. And that's because the translators have done a really good job of picking up on the syntax of this and understanding this is a poem or a hymn that was circulated amongst the earliest followers of Jesus as some of their core doctrinal beliefs centered around these truths of Jesus. And he says like this, listen to how this reads. Verse 11, if we die with him, we'll also live with him. If we endure hardship, we'll reign with him. If we deny him, he'll deny us. And if we're unfaithful, he remains faithful because he cannot deny who he is. Now, there's 4 pairings here. And think of this as like an encapsulated gospel message. And it starts off with this beautiful call to be a disciple. If we die with Jesus, if we die to our sin, our old way of life, and we're brought to brand new life, the life that only Jesus can offer, you see what he says. It's like you die with him, you're going to live with him. And if you endure hardship, he's drawn on this language of suffering. Do you know what's on the other side of the suffering you may be going through right now? It's triumph, it's victory. You see those pairings, the first pairing, life, death, suffering, second pairing, suffering, and victory. Then the third pairing. But if you deny him, and that's what was happening in this early community of Jesus followers, they were ashamed of what was happening to guys like Paul. They were manipulating the gospel. He's like, you want to deny Jesus? He's going to deny you. And this is that moment in the text that it's just uncomfortable. Because for most of us, when we think about a loving, gracious, kind, and merciful God, we don't have a place to understand what it would look like for him to deny anybody. But I mean, think about it in these terms. Like if you spend your whole life rejecting God, and then you meet him one day, and he says, I'm going to give you exactly what you asked for with every breath of your life. Is that unjust? No, it's not. Especially if he tells you, this is how to have life, and you go, no. And he says, okay, I'm not going to force you. But then we look back on that and we go, well, how could that be a good God? Okay, logically that's very inconsistent. You deny him, he's going to give you exactly what he wants. But if you're unfaithful, that doesn't change anything about who he is. He will always be faithful. Man, we could sing this all day long. He is always faithful. And so I want us to really think about this. We're going to start diagramming this text, and we're going to see this design pattern emerge, but it's all built off of the gospel. It's going to be the central theme of everything that we do today. And then he pops out into verse 14. And verse 14 and verse 15 are going to be our primary anchors through this text. And we're going to see how everything just sort of arcs back to the gospel. So let's see what he does in verse 14. Timothy, remind everyone about these things. What things is he talking about? The centrality of the gospel. I need you to constantly be helping people think in their minds and their hearts what it means to be anchored on the gospel. If you're with us last week, we used this language a lot, that our life just be overflowing with the gospel. It just pours out of us into the lives of other people. Like we're just, everywhere we go, we're just emanating the light and the truth and the love of the gospel. It overwhelms us. He was like, I need that to spill out onto these people, the situation that's going on here. And command them in God's presence. Remember who you are standing before, to stop fighting over words. These arguments are useless. They don't produce anything good, and they can ruin those who hear them. So he does something really powerful here, and I want to illustrate it. He says to remind them. So this is my little speech bubble here. Brother, you got to saturate your life with the gospel, right? There's a common phrase out there today that preach the gospel, and if necessary, use words. I get the sentiment behind that, But there's also there's the truth element about Jesus that, yeah, you could like live on point as a follower of Jesus. But if we're not sharing our faith and sharing the gospel, we're not actually committed to the gospel that we're called to. He's like, I need you to remind people about the centrality of the gospel. Yes, live a life that reflects those truths, but it's that combination of both word and deed, both what you are saying and how you are living. That's going to be an explosive demonstration of God's power in the world today. So I need you to do that, number one. And then I just need you to command them. This is going to be my little bullhorn right here. And brother, I just need you to be telling people. They're going to fall off a cliff if they keep going in this direction. And the word that he uses here for command, we could also translate that as warn them. Like we think command is like, stop doing this. That's not what he's saying. And we're going to see when we get down to this section right here, how to do this. Because right now, like we're just like generating in our own minds what that looks like. I'm just going to encourage you, like, let's just wait a second and let this text inform not only who we should be, but how we need to be interacting. So not only who we should be, but how we should be. So I need you to warn them. Now look in your text today and tell me, what are we warning them to do? What are we going to be telling people? Hey, you're going off a cliff. That sounds rhetorical. You can answer me at any point in today's message when I ask a question. I'll answer for you. He says, stop fighting. And the reason why they need to stop fighting, what does he say? He uses a really specific word. What's the word there? Because it'll ruin. It'll ruin those who hear them. Now, here's what's really fascinating about this word. Warn them because it'll ruin them. The word here in the Greek, I'm going to put it up here on the screen. You can see this. We transliterate this Greek word into English, and it's catastrophe, where we get our English word catastrophe from. He's like going, do you see? When you're fighting with one another, it is devastating entire communities. I couldn't help but think of this exact word and the intensity of it this past week when I saw a news story about the 10-year anniversary of what happened in Joplin. 10 years ago. This is a pair of sisters on 18th Street in Joplin looking over their childhood home. It has been leveled. That's the word that he uses here. Now think about that for a second. Like, Paul, you're being so intense. He's like, yes, because you're not understanding the gravity and the impact of what's happening. And I would say for you and me today, this is a really difficult verse to wrap our heads around because this has been not only normalized, it's been popularized. People get paid to do this on television during 24-hour news cycles because they know what it does to us. It draws us right in because what do we love? We love watching people fight and argue. And can you believe they said that? I'm going to watch. Did you see this clip? And we're forwarding links to people. Look at this. Look at this. It's all fighting. And the world of advertising and marketing has totally clued into it. I'm serious. Go to your news feed today and look at how many of those headlines are drawing us right to here. They're just welcoming us into fighting. And he was like, oh no, that's destruction. Just because it's normal doesn't mean that it's right. Being a follower of Jesus, it looks totally different. I'm convinced it looks more different now than it has ever looked before. Because what is sin is now normal. We don't even call it sin anymore. We just call it like life. It's normal. It's good. We boast in it. We wave around the banners of what we believe and think, and we crush other people in our wake. Have you ever thought the language that you're using and those arguments that you're getting into are actually like a tornado that rips through an entire community? It's no wonder he was like, bro, point him to the gospel. Tell them they're going off a cliff. And we're going to see he's going to use some really intense language here in a minute. But watch what he does now in verse 15, because he's going to draw a contrast. And we're going to see sort of these two ways over and over again in this narrative. It's like he says to Timothy, but that ain't like you for you, brother. For you, work hard so you can present yourself to God and receive his approval. be a good worker, one who doesn't need to be ashamed and who correctly explains the word of truth. Now, he uses this language in here. This is fascinating. We're going to draw a little contrast here. Boop. Oh, man, this is a chalk pen. And when you draw on this whiteboard, it's like nails on a chalkboard, but it's in my hand. It's like, whoa. So if you see me do this, it's because it's like, why did I use a chalk marker? Okay, let's imagine this is the cross, and someday we're all going to stand before God. I know it's super sophisticated. Think about the language that he's using here. We could think of it really in two ways. There's like present before a king or present before like a military commander. And you, as a subject or a soldier, are going to say, hey, here I am. Here's what I'm going to present to you. Here's the work that I've done. Here's the results of the mission that we were on. He uses that language like, okay, so you're going to present yourself to God. But what do you present? What are you going to heaven with and saying, here I am? He says it. He says, right at the beginning, work hard. That's the language. We could literally translate that word in the Greek into diligence. We're gonna be diligent. And then he says, work hard. I'm going to say this. That's a W. W, work hard. My note takers today, I'm sorry. My handwriting is getting worse as the day goes on. But then he says, okay, so your diligence and your hard work is to a particular end. And he says it like correctly handling or explaining. I memorized this in a really old version that said, rightly dividing the word of truth. They take that from farmer analogy who would draw a really straight line in his property in order to plant seeds. He's using that language, that truth, that straightness to talk about how we handle the revelation that comes from God, and that's what we present to Him. Okay, it's a huge contrast here. This is where the design features of this text become absolutely brilliant, because everything we're going to do today is hang on these two ideas. Now, we could at every moment in this text just stop, take a breath, and ask the question, how does this apply? How can I take this beautiful narrative and actually put it to use? And let me just like a little press pause on the message here as I draw this line that goes all the way across. Boop. We're actually going to do something that is very helpful anytime you study through the text. Number one, and you've heard me say this 1,000 times, is go slow. 2 verses. There's a ton to chew on here. There's a ton of ways to see, is this what's going on in my life? Is there just constant criticism, bickering, and fighting over different ideas and different understandings, and I don't agree with that, and what about this? I mean, take your pick. Whether it's rights, transgender, borders, politics, I mean, take your pick. We've made sports out of fighting, so we have lots to choose from. Or have we taken seriously what God has revealed to us? Okay, so His Word, literally, I have right here. It is inspired by God Himself. And the challenge is like, what are you doing with that? Are you using that as a way to remind people of the gospel and to help them to stay away from things that are killing them? Or are you ignoring it and focusing on everything else in your life? We focus on everything else. Except how am I handling, how am I treating the truth that comes from God? Where is the Word in your life? And so we're going to draw some application. We're going to call this section over here just having a gospel focus. And then we're just going to make it super simple. We're going to walk through this text and go, okay, there's just some things that we have got to stop doing. And there's going to be some things that we're actually going to be able to put into practice today. And we're just going to list them out. So, if we come over here to verse 14, what do you see? This is a great exercise to do anytime you go through the text. God, what are you teaching me? God, what are you revealing? God, what does it say about who you are and how that should shape who I am? Well, Maybe just because it's normal, maybe I need to start seeing the gravity and the importance to stop fighting. Maybe it's not as cool as I thought it was. Maybe trying to prove my point all the time doesn't actually produce anything good. Maybe it is actually like ruining things. Is anything good coming from that? Those are great questions that all come from one verse. And where am I? Am I actually like pointing people back to the gospel? Am I reminding them of these beautiful truths? Am I warning them of the dangers that they're in right now? I mean, as a parent, like I think about this with my kids all the time. If I watch my kids about to walk into a busy intersection, to think I'm not going to warn them, that's total negligence. Oh no, I mean, it makes total sense. Paul's like, oh no, I'm so concerned about that, I would go jump in the intersection just to keep them safe. He literally said that in verse 10. Are we? Do we have that kind of commitment? Have we ever considered this as being a disciple of Jesus? This kind of hard work? Not only do we remind and warn, but now we're presenting ourselves to God as a diligent worker. Somebody who's going to work hard. Hard work. Have you ever thought, man, maybe what I need to do today is actually need to consider what it means and how I can handle the Word of God. I'm going to put up here correct handle. It's a lot to apply. And we're going to do this as we walk through this text, and the design feature of this narrative is going to really help us to see not just what the text says, but how the text can shape how we live. Right? I know so many of us, we want to come into here on a Sunday morning and be able to take stuff away and apply it to our life. So we've just got a section. So let me encourage you, anytime you're going through the narrative, go slow. And begin thinking, what are some things that just directly apply to my life? Yeah, they may confront some stuff that needs to change, but that's good. So now we're going to jump back into verse 16. We're just going to walk through this text, and we're going to see how verses 17 and 18 are actually subordinate to verse 16. We'll see it come out here really quickly. Avoid worthless, foolish talk that only leads to more godless behavior. Oh, okay. So what does he say? What's the primary verb in that? Nice. I love my people on the front row. You're dialed in. Avoid. What are we avoiding? We're avoiding a kind of language that leads to a kind of lifestyle that's godless. Now, I put these really close together because language and lifestyle are so closely intertwined. We often separate them. We think there's not a whole lot of connection. That's not a biblical perspective. That's sort of our man-made perspective. I would challenge you to reconsider the connection between what comes out of your mouth. This is Jesus' language. He's like, oh, that just is a reflection of what's in your heart. What comes out of you is what's inside of you. You can separate them all you want, but that's not real, Now, what does he say in verse 17? Watch this. Oh, this gets so brutal. That kind of godless behavior that comes from foolish talk, it spreads like cancer in the case, he calls these dudes out, in the case of Hymenaeus and Philetus. Dang, Paul. He's like, what's happening? This right here, he calls it cancer. I'm real sensitive to that word. You got people all over my life who are struggling with cancer right now. In the Greek language, there's a different word that's used here, translated most often as gangrene. Think about this for a second. Now, so I talked to a medical professional this week, and I said, hey, what can you tell me about gangrene? And they instantly were like, oh, it's brutal. We got to get in there and take care of it as soon as possible because it is so deadly. Like gangrene that spreads, it kills that tissue in the body. And more times than not, we have to chop that body part off. Like, that's the solution? Like, hey, I've got gangrene. Okay, we chop your arm off. That's brutal. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's what he's talking about? this kind of language, this kind of fighting is like this deadly disease. And I was like, do you think I should show a picture of that? And they go, no. I was like, what? It's like, if you want to make everybody sick, then show them that picture. And I was like, whatever, it's not that bad. Oh my God, like, do not look up gangrene, because all you will see is black, dead body parts. And that's the language that he uses. Okay, have you ever thought about the language that you're using and the little fights and criticisms and pulling people down in sort of backhanded ways as something that kills? I mean, it's so deadly. It just spreads to everything. Like, you know who, Hymenaeus and Philetus. And I'm just thinking, okay, this is real. This is real people. This isn't something that just happened 2,000 years ago. This is something that's happening right now in our church. And we feel like it's okay. Because it's just, I'm just, hey, did you hear? Deadly. Now watch what he says in verse 18. They, Hymenaeus and Philetus, have left the path of truth. They've claimed that the resurrection of the dead has already occurred. And by doing this, you know what? They're turning people away from the faith. Now that is such an interesting little tidbit, because it gives us the window into what controversy was plaguing this church in Ephesus. People were saying the resurrection had already happened. And Paul, that's like an afterthought. He is way more concerned about the fighting and the language that's going to be used than he is about the specific issue that's causing this huge uproar. It's almost like he's saying, that's not even true. Because when you're rooted in the gospel, you know that, guys, you won't even get to that conclusion if you're overflowing with the gospel. If you're working hard, if you're rightly handling the word of truth, we're going to be talking about the resurrection that already happened, because that doesn't make sense. Stop it. These guys, Hymenaeus and Philetus, they're using this, and it's turning people away from the gospel. They're going away from the truth. How are they going away from the truth? By the language and lifestyle and by the fighting. He's making this crystal clear. Now he's going to do something here in verse 19. Oh my gosh, the beauty of this verse. Watch this. But, don't get discouraged, but God's truth stands firm like a foundation stone. God's truth stands firm like a foundation stone. And on that stone, chiseled into that stone, are these words: the Lord knows whose are his, and all who belong to the Lord must turn away from evil. So in the midst of this dialogue, do you see what he does? He was like, but we have the truth. You and I today, we got it so good. I have a copy of his divine revelation right here. I get to carry it with me. It's stuck in my pocket on my phone. It's crazy. And he's like, guys, do you see the beauty of this divine truth? This is going to be sort of my open Bible here. It's like, we have this. And this word of truth, you see how it's rooted and cemented in these foundational truths. He uses this language of a foundation stone that to somebody who works in masonry will know exactly what it is. I'm just going to sort of draw this giant sort of cinder block. And he's like, the truth of God is like this foundation that you and I, we can stand on this. Oh, we can stand on this all day long. You're going to start to really like my stick figures there. But what's inscribed on this? What does the text say? God knows. God knows what's going on. He can see past all the stuff that we can't see past. He knows whose are his. Remember what that language in the heart of the gospel? What happens if we deny him? Oh, he knows. He knows what's going on. Followers of Jesus, they're going from this direction to this direction. And then he does something. I love this. Paul does this all over 2 Timothy. He was like, now listen to this. Verses 20 and 21. We sort of see this as the dividing line between all things. It's the gospel. What does he say? It's like this. It's like in a wealthy house. You know how some people, they got the good dishes and the okay dishes? He says some utensils are made of gold and silver, the good stuff, but some are made of wood and clay. The expensive utensils, those are brought out for special occasions. The cheap ones, that's just like everyday use. Okay, you and I know what this looks like. Like you got those plastic Forum or Shakespeare's cups, that you bring out as like a paint cup or something. And then you got those plates that you get out when family comes over. You all know what I'm talking about. He's like, yeah, it's like that. Watch what he says. If you keep yourself pure, you'll be a special utensil for honorable use. Your life will be clean and you will be ready for the master to use you for every good work. He says this. Let's simplify this. Hey man, this is going to be our little bowl. He's like, you should just be the good dishes. It's not super complicated. Think about how God is going to use you to help people understand truth and love and light and kindness and peace and faithfulness and joy. You're going to be used by God for that. And so what I need you to do, Timothy, in the midst of everything that's going on, I need you, brother, I need you to keep yourself pure. The question that comes to us is, I'm going to put a little question mark here on the cup. How do you want to be used? Because if we thought about that in that, if we let that question sort of guide our way of our thinking, it's like, okay, so I could be used by God. Is God going to use me in this way? Is God going to use me to spread death? Is God using me when I fight and criticize, when I pull down? Is God using me when I pull people away from the gospel to anything else? No, actually, no. You deny Him, there's a consequence for that. That's actually just and loving. And the beauty is, He's inviting all of us right now, just like He was 2,000 years ago. I'm going to invite you to a different way of doing everything. And it's going to be a different focus for you. It's going to be a gospel focus. Away from these traps that are being set by the devil, I'm going to invite you to a different way of living your life. And so I want us to really think, how is God using me right now? And we're going to section this off, and we're going to see what He does next. But before we do that, let's just draw some conclusions. So we come back and it's like, Mom, that's some really intense stuff. So what am I learning? What is this text teaching me? Who is God showing me about Himself and how that should shape who I am? Well, I guess I should avoid spreading disease. Ah, that makes sense. Well, maybe I should just be the good dishes. That makes sense. But really practically, how are you? This is what He's challenging all of us to consider. How are you keeping yourself pure? So much of our time and energy is spent pursuing things that don't keep us pure. They actually corrupt us. And one of the easiest ways to become corrupted, to turn away from the truth, it just starts with the things we're saying and the fighting that we're doing. And we stop to see it for what it is. And suddenly, we're like a deadly cancer that's spreading throughout our families and throughout our communities and throughout our churches. There's a ton of application here. And just because we come into a text and we see the application, does that mean we're automatically going to apply it? No. But that's our invitation today. Now, we're to come down here to verse 22. Verse 22 is very special. And so I'm going to treat it a little bit special up here on the board. I'm going to draw that all the way over here. And I really want to encourage you to just consider the impact of just a single verse and how it really cuts across all of this, especially across the truth of God and the foundation of who He knows. Watch what He says. Run from anything that stimulates youthful lusts. Don't walk from it. Don't consider it. Don't think about it for a little while. Don't flirt with it. Run as fast as you can in the opposite direction. Anything that stimulates youthful lust. Instead, pursue righteous living, faithfulness, love, and peace. Enjoy the companionship of those who call on the Lord with pure hearts. I mean, he said this really, really interesting phrase. Run. That's where my stick figure drawings get a little sketchy. Let's see. I'm running. He's falling, actually. I need to draw his leg with a little more stability. But again, where am I running? Not just from, but to. Now, this language that he uses for stimulates youthful lust. It's like triggers. What is it that stirs your affections for those things that pull you away from God? And you and I, if we sat down and we're serious about this, like today, I'm just going to think and chart out all the things that sort of trigger my desire for stuff that's really not good. And for some of us, it's going to be like, well, whenever I watch that show, I always see something that I shouldn't see, and it just kind of gets that engine revving. Or when I listen to that one person talk, I just always get a little angry at what's going on. And instead of staying away from it, you know what we do? We feed it. And he's like, yeah, don't do that. Does that make sense? Because it'll destroy you. It won't just destroy you. It'll spread like a cancer, and now it's destroying other people. Remember what he said back in verse 10? I'm willing to suffer so that somebody could know the truth about Jesus. And we're not willing to run from sin to help somebody else. And so let me challenge you today to consider, what are you doing right now that's stirring up some really unhealthy passions? I heard this statistic again this last week, and every time I hear it, I don't know how to process it. Like 95% of men are dealing with a pornography issue. Are you kidding me? I mean, we get all amped up about global pandemics. That's not 95% of the male population. And that's devastating homes and marriages. And it's a generational sin that's getting passed on. Guys, we got to stop clicking on stuff that stirs up those affections. It's death. In the moment, it may look good. It's not. It's death masquerading itself. Right? We all have these things that stir up wrong affections. Right? Somebody pulled up next to me the other day in a wide body 2020 Challenger Hellcat. And I was like, stirring affections. I looked at him, I was like, I think that preacher should drive that car, shouldn't she? She was like, brr. What stirs those? Okay, I say that jokingly. I'm not kidding. I was like, what do I need to sell? No. I was challenged by a pastor years and years ago with this same phrase, but in the positive. This is what stirs your affections for Jesus. And I always just resonated with me. Even now, years and years, I'm still quoting it because I just think, life is so much better when I am actively pursuing those things which stir my affections for Jesus. And this may look a little bit different for you than somebody else in the room. For me, I kind of click into music, and it stirs my affections for the things of God. I get into moments like this on a Sunday gathering. We're centered around the truth of His Word. And I'm telling you what, there is very little else in this world that gets me as amped up about this gathering that way. This is beautiful. And yesterday, I was in a bounce house with my 5-year-old. I got pretty jazzed up because at some moment, I really feel like I was able to see through my love for my daughter in a hot, sweaty bounce house. The laughter and the silliness. And just for a minute, I was like, I wonder if this is what God feels like sometimes when we are just experiencing His presence. She didn't care what we were doing. She just wanted to be in the bounce house with her dad. And sometimes I'm like, is that how it is? Is that as simple as it gets? Maybe it is. And that's why Paul says, so this is what I want you to pursue. He says, righteous living. What does that mean? It's a life of faithfulness and love and peace. It's the FLPs of faith, man. And then he says this, I love this. He goes, and we do that in community with one another. This is going to be my little drawing for community. All these little dots connected. This is where some of us are absolutely starving right now because we think we can be successful here and stay away from this without community. That's not a biblical idea. We just make that up. To center and ground ourselves in the gospel, to let it overflow, we're going to see so many beautiful things emerge. So really quickly, we come over here and we see what? What are we staying away from? What do we need to just sever in our life right now? It's things that stir up that lust. Don't just think sexual lust. Think anything that stirs your heart away from the things of God. And this one right here, we're just going to call this the FLPs of living for Jesus. We walk through a narrative and we say, God, what is this teaching me about who you are and how this is shaping me into a new person? Right? We're going through 16 verses today really slowly, and we're seeing a design pattern emerge. Now, that was 22, and verse 23, he's going to just remind us of some really important things. Watch what he says. Again, I say, he's like, I'm going to say this again. Don't get involved in foolish, ignorant arguments that only start fights. So he's coming right back to here. And do you see these words that he's labeling? Foolish, ignorant, useless, deadly, destructive. Stuff that's coming out of our mouth. And the lifestyle that it's leading to. And so he says, in like all caps, don't get, that doesn't look like a T, involved. I'm going to say it again. Stop it. And this is kind of that language, like you kind of imagine like a crowd of people over here, and you have a choice. Do I get into the mix of it? Like we're drawn to the fighting. Do I continue to feed that? Or am I going to go a different direction? Am I, based upon the truth, am I going to go in a different direction? It's a different kind of life. A totally different focus. Which leads us to our last couple verses, 24 through 26. And watch what he says there in verse 24. A servant of the Lord must not quarrel. That's the language for fighting. Okay, don't fight? Yes. Stop fighting? How many times is he going to say this to us? Stop fighting. Stop fighting. Stop fighting. Stop fighting. And we're like, no, they don't agree with me, so I'm going to fight with them. Do what I want. But instead, be kind to everyone. Be able to teach and be patient with difficult people. Gently instruct those who oppose the truth. Like, oh my gosh. Who's he talking about? He's talking about guys like Hymenaeus and Philetus who are turning people away, who are spreading like a cancer. What are we supposed to do with those guys? Oh, yeah. Well, don't fight, right? He's only said that a half dozen times. Don't fight, okay? And I gotta be kind to them? Wait a minute. I gotta be kind to people who don't agree with me, who are doing horrible things, who are spreading a false gospel. I have to be kind to them? You mean I can't go on this rant and scream and yell and get an army of people behind me? No, actually you can't. But you know what you can do? You can be patient. And you can think about teaching. And this is how we are going to gently Can you imagine that? Gently instruct those who are in opposition to the truth. Who's he talking about? Guys like Hymenaeus and Philetus. Oh, those guys again. What are we supposed to do? Following Jesus looks totally different. Just because we can find teachers who align with our ideologies and our passions and our search for whatever, doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean we can fight with them. How are we supposed to deal with people who stand in total opposition to us, who, if they had their way, would ruin the proclamation of the gospel? Well, Paul just told us in verses 9 and 10, you can't stop the gospel. You can chain us to walls all you want. You can't stop this. How are we to live? Let's draw some conclusions. He says it like this. All right, well, don't get involved. And don't fight. I mean, he's really just saying the same thing over and over again. But this is where you and I, my friends, can live a life filled with kindness and patience, teaching others, gently instructing them. Because watch what Paul says next. He's going to say this so clearly. Maybe God will change their hearts. Maybe they'll learn the truth. Maybe when they see what following Jesus looks like, it looks like this, they might stand on the truth too. They might turn from this to the beauty of the gospel. Remember what he said. I mean, remember the opening verse. Remind them of the gospel. Man, we got to get people from spreading cancer. They're not seeing it like what it is. But we do, because we have the truth that comes from God. And so when we come up alongside and we're gentle and we're kind, we're like so different. They've never seen it before. They see us with a gospel focus. It might actually turn some people back to the truth. That's the work of God. Verse 26, then they're going to come to their senses and escape from the devil's trap. I mean, he's literally just said, this is the way of the devil. And there are people right now in this room, listen to what he says, who are being held captive by him to do whatever he wants. And what has he just said? He's just said, this is where the devil is. I mean, he took it like hyper-spiritual. And I think it's time that we let the scriptures shape us, shape our understanding. And there may be somebody sitting next to you that's being held captive by him. And your Father in heaven has sat you right next to him so that you can show them what love looks like, what faithfulness looks like, what a different kind of gospel-focused life looks like, because God cares about them that much. Hear me. He cares about you that much. Following Jesus looks different. So my brothers and sisters, as we close out today, I want to give you one final statement. We'll wrap everything up. Because the right person in a bad situation is always the right solution. A right person, who you are. This is who we are. You can drop us into the middle of this. We're going to bring some light with us. Bring some hope with us. Things that look dead, oh, Jesus bring those things back to life. We are the light bearers. We bring with us the hope of the gospel. And my prayer for us in just 30 seconds is going to be, God, send us. Send us into those places. Because the right person in a bad situation is always the right solution. That may be exactly where you are right now. You may be standing like those two sisters in Joplin, who 10 years ago was looking over the wreckage of the home that they grew up in. I tried to find this house on 18th Street in Joplin, and I couldn't find it because everything's been rebuilt. And I think, how many of us today, maybe it's time to start rebuilding? Let's pray. Our God and our Father, forgive us. We have We have too often been careless with our words. We have not seen it as the destructive force that it is. So open up our hearts and our minds today to hear your invitation to be different. Give us a gospel focus. The next time we start hearing those fights and those quarrels, help us to avoid them, to stay away from them. Help us to have the courage and boldness to point people back to the truth of your Son, Jesus, and give us the strength and the gentleness and the patience and the kindness to help steer people away from things that are just dying. And we are trusting that you bring dead things back to life. That's our prayer today. Help us, oh God, to be a people who are chasing after your Son, Jesus. We pray these things in his name. Amen.
Would you stand and sing with us?
Speak to me. You're the only voice I want to hear. Walk with me. Show me who you are as I draw near. If you're not in it, then I don't want it. Let all else fade away.
You can be seated. As you walked in this morning, you probably walked past the table just outside these doors, and on that table was a cup, and in that cup is a cracker and juice. And if you haven't been to church before, or this faith thing is new for you, or you're just pursuing Jesus for the first time, this next part of the service may seem a little strange. But this practice of gathering together with fellow believers and taking this meal is something that we've seen as a part of the church for over 2,000 years. Because on the night that Jesus was betrayed and beaten and crucified, he had one final meal with his disciples. And at this meal, he took the bread and he took the wine, and he showed them what communion looks like, and to take it in remembrance of what Jesus was about to do. And so that's what we do at this time each week together as believers. We remember what Jesus did for us, for you, and for me, because we believe that Jesus changes everything. And so as you take the cracker and as you take the juice, and as you remember what Jesus did, ask yourself that question: how did Jesus change everything for me? Let's take communion together now.
Stand and sing together. The rumors of the Son of Man, stories of a Savior, holiness with human hands, a treasure for the traitor. No ear has heard, no eye has seen the image of the Father, until heaven came to live with me, a rescue like no other. You are worthy. You are worthy of your name. You are worthy. You are worthy of your name, Jesus. my ransom, my Savior, my refuge, my hiding place. And you're my helper, my healer, my blessed Redeemer, my answer, my saving grace. And you're my hope in the shadows, my strength in the battle, my anchor for all my days. And you stand by my side and you stood in my place. Jesus, no other name. Only Jesus, no other name. You are worthy. You are worthy of your name. You are worthy. You are worthy of your name. You are worthy. Yes, you are. You are worthy of your name. You are worthy. You are worthy of your name, Jesus. He is worthy. As always, it was awesome to worship alongside you guys today. As we go out, let's remember that He is worthy of every name that's been given to Him. He's our author, He's our maker, He's our blessed Redeemer. He's everything. And all that He is enough for all of us. So let's go out and love Him and show others how to love Him as well. Have a great week. See you next Sunday.